Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are, because we do have a very international panel discussion today. We have a panelist joining us from Europe, then we have our moderator joining us from Taipei. I'm Stephen Pei. I'm representing the Asian American Scholar Forum, AASF, to welcome all of you. AASF is an association of American scholars of Asian descent, united to promote academic belonging, openness, freedom, and equality for all. Without further ado, let me introduce our moderator today, Margaret Lewis. She's a professor of law at Seton Hall University. Her research focuses on laws in China and Taiwan, with an emphasis on criminal justice and human rights. His recent publications include Criminalizing China and The Time to End the U.S. Justice Department's China Initiative. We thank her to join us all the way from Taipei. It is 12 midnight over there. So thank you for staying up late. Without further ado, Maggie, please take over.
Well, thanks, Stephen, and thanks to everyone at AASF. I can't think of a better reason to be up in the middle of the night. I immediately said yes when they asked if I could moderate this panel. We have 90 minutes and a lot to cover, so I will be brief. But I do want to just point out for those on this webinar who are not familiar with Professor Anming Hu's case, that as we have 2021 drawing to a close, his involvement, his visits by the FBI started in early 2018. So this has been a number of years that he has undergone scrutiny, investigation, prosecution, a trial. That trial then ended in a hung jury. The Department of Justice had the option of dropping the case there. It did not. It then said it was going to pursue a retrial. It was at that point that Judge Varlin stepped in and issued a judgment of acquittal, where the judge says that even viewing the evidence in a light most favorable to the government, there is not enough that's been presented by the government to meet its minimal evidentiary burden, that no reasonable, rational fact finder would say that beyond a reasonable doubt standard had been met. This is a highly unusual document. And I encourage you, not just for the people who are legal nerds like me, that it's well worth reading. And so today, we're having a chance to, I'm so delighted to hear from Professor Hu himself, and I'll introduce the other panelists as well. I do want to emphasize that even though this individual case has come to a conclusion and a happy one, first of all, the amount of just the toll, emotional, financial, physical, that he and his family have undergone. I want to make sure we don't lose sight of that, just because at the end of the day, he was acquitted. And also that the Department of Justice's China initiative continues. And it is ongoing. There is the concern that there is heightened scrutiny of people based on their connectivity to China by virtue of their heritage, their current ties, their national origin, and that we need to be clear to the Biden administration that they must do better to address these issues. So with that, I want to introduce the panelists and then get our conversation going. So first, of course, we have Dr. Anming Hu. Professor Hu was raised in China and is a naturalized Canadian citizen, but in 2013, he joined the Department of Mechanical, Aerospace, and Biomedical Engineering at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, as an assistant professor, and he later earned tenure. He is a specialist in nanotechnology and laser processing. My kids would love to hear about the latter one there. And Dr. Hu was terminated by UT when he faced the federal charges, but this fall was offered to rejoin the faculty, and we'll let Dr. Hu explain his current status. And we are so grateful to have this opportunity to hear from him directly after so many years of not being able to speak openly. Second, we've had Mara Hvistendahl. She's an investigative reporter with The Intercept and the author of the book that you can see in the background, The Scientist and the Spy, A True Story of China, the FBI, and Industrial Espionage. Highly recommend it if you're looking for a read over the holidays. And it's on a case that foreshadowed the China Initiative. Mara previously reported for 8 years from Shanghai, where she was the China bureau chief for Science magazine. Her first book, A Natural Selection, was a finalist for the 2012 Pulitzer Prize and the Los Angeles Times Book Prize. And third, we're going to be joined by Jamie Satterfield, who is an investigative journalist with more than 3 decades of experience specializing in legal affairs, policing, public corruption, environmental crime, and civil rights violations. Her journalism has been recognized by the Scripps Howard Foundation, the Society of Professional Journalists Sigma Delta Chi Awards, the Green Eyeshed Awards, the Tennessee Press Association, and many others. So it's a fantastic panel. And I've now done enough talking. So I want to start by going back before Professor Hu's case and have Mara, who's been following not just the China Initiative, but before that was started in 2018, the cases that led up to it, and ask her to give us a little context about similar cases and give us some framework for how we understand what then happened in 2018 and led to this trial in 2021. Thanks, Mara.
Sure. Well, it's great to be here with all of you. I am big fans of all your work and followed Professor Hu's case very closely, and often relied on Jamie's reporting to understand what was happening. So I'm excited for this panel. Yeah, it's the popular understanding of the China Initiative is that it is something that's come up in the past few years under the Trump administration. And that is true to that the China Initiative itself was established in 2018, but it's important to understand that there is a long history of cases that precede it. That when I think about the FBI's efforts to combat trade secrets theft and some of the missteps that have accompanied those, I go back to 2009, 2010, when the Economic Espionage Unit was set up within the FBI, and that was when there really began to be a concerted effort to go after cases that agents believed to involve trade secrets theft or technology transfer from China. And I think that what happened is in some ways similar to the post 9/11 reaction, where you had a legitimate problem. In that case, it was terrorism. In this case, there was concern within the national security community about trade secrets theft from China that resulted in an overreaction. So after 9/11, we saw civil liberties abuses, cases involving mosques where really the people who were charged or investigated turn out to be completely innocent. And we've seen something similar with some trade secrets theft cases since 2010. Early on, many of these cases involved corporations, and the FBI would work very closely with corporate security officers, some of whom were themselves former US intelligence, to develop cases involving those US corporations' IP. And some of the tools that were rolled out are fairly remarkable to legal experts, because they show that the US government was treating these cases like extreme national security threats. So you saw sting operations being tried, where the FBI would try to lure somebody into committing trade secrets theft. You saw the use of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, which is something that is supposed to be reserved for terrorism, for really extreme crimes. And what that means is that in some cases, like in the case that I looked at in my book, where FISA was used, agents were able to access just immense amounts of communications of defendants. And so there was this legitimate problem that the FBI and the Justice Department dealt with by really throwing the book at it and using every potential tool within their grasp. And at the same time, in many FBI field offices, there was this awareness that there was a priority on bringing these cases, that agents would be rewarded for bringing them. And so the result was a number of investigations that probably should not have gone ahead, where, maybe you had agents who had very little grounding in China, who were also dealing with complex technologies. I mean, these are very complicated cases. And I think the case of Professor Hu is really no exception. I mean, I don't mean to suggest that investigation should have gone ahead, but the technologies involved, some of the laws involved and so forth, all of these are fairly complex. And then if you add on top of that, the fact that many agents sitting in an FBI field office in Iowa or Missouri or Tennessee or wherever don't necessarily have a deep grasp of Chinese politics and of the relationship between the Chinese government and Chinese companies and Chinese universities, and you get kind of the mess that we're in today. And so, these early cases involved corporations often, but by the mid 2010s, you started to also see cases brought involving scholars at US universities. And some of these early cases were very alarming already. One that many have probably heard about is the case of Professor Xiaoxing Xi at Temple University in Philadelphia, where he woke up one morning to FBI agents barging down his door ready to barge down his door with a battering ram. And it turned out that he was under scrutiny for what was fairly routine communication and collaboration with colleagues back in China. The sort of research that they were dealing with was basic research. It wasn't clear that there was any kind of applied technology at stake. At one point, his lawyer went to the inventor of the technology at issue in his case, and the inventor of that technology said, basically, this is an absurd case. It should not have been brought. And so charges were thrown out in his case. And that was really the first in a string of cases. Sherry Chen, there were other cases involving pharmaceutical secrets where charges were thrown out. And so, fast forward to Professor Hu's case, and there's already a pattern of, people being charged where really that they should not have been charged with anything to begin with. And in other cases of charges being severely downgraded, where the government went in hoping to find espionage or hoping to find economic espionage, and what they could come up with was, lying to federal agents or grant fraud. So this is a longstanding pattern. And there were some remarkable cases where the FBI went into academic institutions and did not even end up charging anyone. So in 2018, 2019, the FBI spent 18 months on campus at MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston, really instilling fear into many of the researchers who worked there. Dozens of people, I believe, were interviewed by the FBI. Several people were put on leave. Several people voluntarily left because they had really had enough with the entire situation, and did not enjoy the feeling of they felt like they were under scrutiny, and even if they were innocent, that people no longer trusted them. And after those 18 months, after the community had kind of been roiled by fear, there were still no charges brought. And So that's the scope of issues that we're talking about. And it was in that environment that the China Initiative was launched in late 2018 as a kind of umbrella to, ostensibly it was about trade secrets theft, it was about fighting industrial espionage and dealing with unreported ties among professors on campus. But as others have pointed out, it has never been very well defined as an initiative, and there have been a whole slew of additional cases, like one including turtle smuggling, that have been brought under that umbrella. And just to bring up to Professor Hu's trial, what I find so remarkable is that in all the years that I spent reporting on these cases, there were a number of defense attorneys who told me, the unfortunate truth was that often defendants would do everything they could to avoid going to trial. And that meant sometimes pleading guilty to lesser charges, because there was this perception that a jury trial in many parts of America would just not go well for them. The case I looked at in my book was set in Iowa. And, I remember hearing that there was just this thought that if this were to go before a jury in Iowa, it wouldn't go well. And then, then Trump comes onto the scene and sort of fanned a lot of anti-China sentiment and so forth, and that seemed to be even more the case. And so I think it's quite remarkable that this case went before a jury, and I think you'll hear a bit more about that. And the jury did not buy it, and the result is that it ended in a hung jury, and then eventually Professor Hu was acquitted. And it says a lot about the capabilities of Americans to kind of sift through this information, figure out what's bullshit and what's not. And so I find it inspiring that the outcome was what it was. But it is unfortunate that Professor Hu, of course, had to go through all of this in the first place, and that could have been avoided. So
thanks so much for that.
Pass it off. Yeah.
Yeah, no, and I want to say, as someone who works in criminal justice, that there's already so much pressure on defendants to plead guilty, and plea bargaining is a feature of our criminal justice system, not a bug. Jury trials are rare to begin with, and then you add on additional reasons for defendants to question whether they will get a fair trial, and it really is all the more rare that you're going to see people proceeding all the way to trial. So with that, I'm just so happy to hand the floor over to Dr. Hu. Anming, you've been inspiring in your spirit and in your perseverance, and we just want to hear whatever throughout this journey you'd like to share with everyone who is really looking forward to hearing your thoughts.
Thanks to Professor Lewis. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. So let me thank the Asian American Scholar Forum to give me this opportunity to share my story, and also have a chance to get together with my friends and supporters. So my name is Anming Hu. I'm a Chinese-Canadian scientist in nanotechnology. I grew up in a rural village in China with a strong passion for science. After obtaining the 2 PhDs in physics, I moved to the US from Canada in 2013 and become a professor at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. Instead of working for advanced scientific research, I was left to fight for my innocence against this unjust prosecution, which destroyed my career, my reputation, ruined my life, and the lives in my family. I, like many other scientists of the Asian descent, who closely surveilled subjectively to the malicious investigations and wrongfully prosecution under the Department of Justice China Initiative. So let me briefly summarize the wrongful prosecution against me. On February 27, 2020, I was waked by the theory of heavy knocking on my door. Still in my pajamas, I opened the door and 8 FBI agents burst into my house and arrested me. They informed me that I was being charged for the wire fraud and false statement. At that time, I couldn't understand what really happened. I thought that must have been a mistake. But within the same day, I was put into jail and was asked by my university to resign from my tenured position within 48 hours. So government charged me with wire fraud based on an accusation that I failed to disclose my affiliation with the Chinese university on a university form in connected with the 2 research grants from NASA. But this disclosed form is not part of the grant application itself, but is for the faculty annual review. Despite my adherence to my university's disclosed policy, I was still charged with the federal crimes and then placed under the house arrest separately from my family. In June 2021, so this year, my case went to the trial and resulted in the mistrial after the jury deadlocked when concern of the FBI misconduct came to the light. Despite the outcry from the Asian American community and the concern raised by the member of the Congress, the civilization group, the government still pressed to retry my case. In September 2021, I was acquitted for all charges by the federal judge after finding that the evidence presented by the government was insufficient for the juror to convict me on any of the charges brought against me. So it's very crucial to highlight the wrongful accusation and the racial profiling in my case. Although I was acquitted, the main point here is that what happened to me is part of the broad pattern of the racial targeting and profiling of the scientists and the researchers of Asian descent who are facing mass investigation, surveillance, criminal prosecutions for similar charges, as the Mara mentioned. So China initiative was originally meant to combat economic espionage and treat the secret theft, but in practice it was scrutinized and treated Asian American scientists as suspects based on their race, ethnicity, or ancestry, create numerous fear across our community. Serious concern of alleged FBI misconduct has surfaced in the China initiative cases, including mine. In my case, one FBI agent started my case based on Google search of my summer seminar in China on the website, and then translated the Chinese material with the Google translation. Prior to my arrest, the FBI uncovered the surveillance and followed me for over a year and a half in an effort to catch spies. They even surveilled my college student son. They didn't find any evidence of economic espionage or any other criminal activity. Let me repeat. So they didn't find any evidence of economic espionage or any other criminals. So the FBI agent have a poor knowledge and understanding of basic academic activities and criminalize any connection to China, which are professional or totally legal. For example, conducting a peer review for academic journal is part of the daily routine work of a professor. It is possible for us to receive the couple of invitations to review academic manuscript for publication every day. So FBI checked thousands of my email and hundreds of manuscripts are reviewed. They found one manuscript are reviewed, special for the Journal of Alloy and Compound. That's the well-known German academic journal. So this the manuscript was submitted by a couple of Chinese professors. So FBI checked those professors' affiliation and their institute and found that that institute also supports some Chinese military program. I didn't know those Chinese professors. Nor those Chinese professors directly involved in any military program. But an academic article I peer-reviewed once for a German academic journal was enough for FBI to assume I have a direct relationship with the Chinese military. So another ridiculous example is that I offered the graduate student research assistantship for PhD degree through my department at UDK in 2019. So this Chinese student had recently graduated from the University of Florida and lived in US already for 3 years. Before he attended the University of Florida, he had the 1 month internship with the Aviation Industry Corporation of China, AVIC. So AVIC was on the regulation list of Bureau of Industry and Security at the US Department of Commerce. So FBI twisted this 1 month internship experience from 3 years ago into that I offer a Chinese researcher from AVIC operation at UDK. I cannot forget the great pain caused by this unjust prosecution. So prosecution devastated every aspect of my life. Prior to my arrest, I hope I become a US citizen and waiting for the green card in America. I loved my job as a university professor, which allowed me to share my knowledge with the students while working on my research. Within hours of my arrest, I had lost the career I worked all my life to build. The university sustained me without pay and later terminated my tenureship. Overnight, I lost my job, my research, and my student. So after being placed house arrested, I struggled with my physical and mental health. I have type 2 diabetes and need regular medical care. But for a long time, I was not allowed to see a doctor or even to go to the deck of my own house to get the fresh air. I was treated like the prisoner, and my house is just like the jail cell. Losing my job and being separated from my family also affected my mental health. I became depressed and very often questioned myself. My decision leave Canada to move to US and devote my life to scientific research in this country. It is the very dark time of my life. But I don't want to give up. I have to fight against this injustice and fight for my innocence. So after my acquittal, I'm still trying to pick up the piece of my life and restore my reputation that was shattered by this prosecution. I was so grateful to the overwhelming support I received from members of the Congress, community organizations, civil rights groups, professional and faculty organizations, including my colleagues at the UDK, who strongly support my reinstatement. Move forward, I hope to continue my work as the scientist and educator in this country. Academics across the world and the country have sent the letters to the policymakers to express their concern about the China initiative. Many worry about if those efforts continue, the US will be seen as a less welcoming environment, and in turn spur the brain drain of talent in science and innovation in this country. Those Asian American scientists and professors has significantly contributed to the leadership of US in science and technology. Wrongfully targeting of those talented Chinese and Asian Americans will not make United strong. Thanks for your listen.
Thank you so much for giving us that background, and also, how inspiring it is that you continue to believe in being in the United States and as a U.S. citizen, even though I'm somewhere else right now. I'm very grateful because the profiling, or just even if it's not intentional profiling, bias, which we know can be conscious or unconscious, is wrong and has no place in investigations and prosecutions. And the Department of Justice says that clearly in its own guidance, that the principle of non-discrimination is clear. So all of these reasons to get rid of the China initiative and the broader concerns, even outside of that framing of putting a spotlight on people because of characteristics of who they are, not just what they have done, is reason enough to get rid of it. But we're seeing more and more too this chilling effect, and that the ultimate goal that the U.S. government says is to make the U.S. Strong, long-term, economically competitive against China in science and engineering. And we're doing a great job of scaring away people who can help achieve that goal. So we're seeing that more and more. Before I turn to Jamie Satterfield to talk about her experience reporting on the trial, I do want to give a chance for Dr. Hu's lawyer, who is with us, Phil Lamonaco, to say a few words if he'd like to jump in here with a few reflections of his experience.
Well, good morning and good evening to everybody. I'll try to be brief. I do have a few facts that sort of stand out in what we went through. And I think they're important to all of the Chinese scientists that are out there. Their work is considered low-hanging fruit to the FBI. In other words, one of the main things that scientists do, professors do, is they publish everything they work on. So it's very easy for an FBI agent to just Google the scientist's name, and the publications will come up. And if he has a collaboration with anybody in China, they are very, very likely to become suspects in the minds of the FBI, that here's a professor at a university in the United States that is collaborating with somebody in China. In years past, that was encouraged. The professors at the universities that had the most contacts with other universities around the world were doing great things for the university. Well, the China initiative has sort of turned that on its head, and that's unfortunate. There's another thing that stands out in my mind, that after a year and a half of undercover investigation of Professor Hu and not finding anything, no smoking gun whatsoever, they continued. And my impression is they continued because of an improper motive. They wanted to continue because of the fact that the person they were investigating was Chinese. I may be wrong, and I wish I were wrong on that, but they were instructed to go out and investigate Chinese professors, Chinese scientists, and so they were focused on that. And when they didn't find anything in our particular case, they started to investigate Professor Hu's internal paperwork with the university, and the fact that Professor Hu had NASA grants, which he told them when they finally came and talked to him a year and a half later. He told them he had NASA grants. He was completely open with them, and the FBI agent testified at that point he didn't think that Professor Hu had committed any, or was was lying to them at all. But what they did is they looked through the paperwork and looked at NASA and the NASA grant, and there's a NASA restriction that says that NASA will not collaborate with China on its NASA grants. And so they concocted a theory that because he didn't answer an internal document that the University of Tennessee required every year, didn't answer it correctly, didn't disclose the University of Beijing that Professor Hu had a part-time summer job with, that he was trying to trick NASA into a NASA money. And unfortunately, I do agree that the power of the government is overwhelming when it comes to going to trial. It's if you're on a, I'm sure Jamie can speak to this. If you're on a jury and the government is standing up with FBI agents and special agents from NASA and Department of Energy and their experts saying that person is guilty, that's not supposed to be evidence. That's supposed to be just something that the prosecutor is saying. They have to prove their guilt, but the overwhelming force of the government puts in the mind of the jury, well, we wouldn't be here unless this person were guilty of something. Fortunately, we had 2, maybe 3 jurors that looked at the facts when the facts started rolling in at trial and said, well, this is bullshit. and I don't care what they say. I'm not changing my mind. He's innocent. And those jurors hung in there all the way through jury deliberations and came back and reported to the judge that the jury was hopelessly deadlocked. And all the way through, I think part of the strategy that worked really well for us is that we filed a motion to dismiss right up front, arguing that the NASA restriction was vague and that there was no harm, there was no wire fraud if there was no intent to harm. And we raised that issue pre-trial. We raised it during the trial. The magistrate denied our motion, but then it went to the judge and he denied, well, he didn't deny it. He took it under advisement. And then he held it under advisement the whole trial. And then at the end of the trial, our motion sort of fit with the evidence. And he was already predisposed to know what we were saying. And, outside of God helping us on this case, and I think that was the main glory that should go in this case, is that we did a lot of praying every day, didn't we? I mean, and outside of God, I think the next step was Judge Varlin was a real stand-up guy and did the right thing. So that's all I need to say. Thank you for all being here.
Thanks for all of your work on this case. As a lawyer, I know what it takes to prepare for a trial, and it's not easy in any circumstances. So Jamie, you've covered a lot of different kinds of cases in your career, and I'd love to know how you came to this case, and then your experience covering it through trial as someone who read your reports. I really appreciated having that view from inside the courtroom and what was really happening on the ground as this was playing out.
Thank you. This is a sort of little known fact is I can't cover every trial that takes place. And I depend on lawyers and judges and prosecutors to give me little tips about cases. When Dr. Hu was arrested, and this is where the destruction of his life began, because upon his arrest, we get a press release from the University of Tennessee that says that they've fully cooperated and essentially threw Dr. Hu under the bus. And then, of course, we had a press release from the U.S. Attorney's Office that although he's charged with fraud, they certainly left the impression of that he's a spy. And so the first few stories that came out, including in my own publication, were heavily, and he could not say anything. That's the key. The defendant doesn't get that shot to say anything. And so the first bit of reporting on Dr. Hu, you would have thought that he was a spy. Go government, especially in East Tennessee. I'm in Florida today visiting, but but East Tennessee's my home, and I don't, but it's a very white place. It just is. That's the facts. And so it would have been very easy, truthfully, for this case to be very quickly resolved with a plea agreement in which he would not have gotten jail time. So he would have taken it as somebody with a stellar background. And then the government would have done another release about how successful this initiative was. So I want to say in the beginning, and this happens every day. I don't care if you're a crack dealer. Every day the government is allowed basically to put out allegations against people. And very often the media just takes the release and writes the story. So having said that, this was not my case in the beginning. It fell to someone else. And I was working a separate investigation. And a lot of the judges and lawyers knew I was very busy. And so here's what I'm getting to. I got a call about a week before this trial was to begin from Judge Varlin's clerk. And I have great respect for Judge Tom Varlin. And it was just a suggestion that I should cover this trial. And honestly, the minute I heard opening statements, I'm looking at the judge going, gotcha. Because it was apparent from the beginning that Dr. Who did nothing wrong. And it was also very apparent from the beginning that he was set up. And unlike perhaps some of these more complicated cases, these agents weren't doing technology and deep investigation. They Googled the man. Got some affiliation with this Beijing University, and they were off to the races. That's all they had on them. And that was my thing when I first hear the opening statements and thinking, well, if you can Google and it comes up, he's not hiding it. That was my, very first reaction is there's nothing about this man that he's hiding anything. And the University of Tennessee is clearly benefiting. And that's the other thing that I want people to understand is this idea that he was committing fraud for some financial purpose. He got nothing except the opportunity to give NASA some really good technology and his expertise. He gave and gave and gave. And it was the university and the agencies for which he did work that benefited. So right away, my concern just as a citizen is, oh my Lord, what if this jury does exactly what Phil LaMonaco said? And that is they look at these FBI agents and they look at this man here who's Chinese and they make that very simple decision. Well, the government would not falsely accuse this fellow. And maybe I've got some little, bias in the background, but that would have been an easy out for a jury. And so what I did, and I do this, I try to do this with all cases, but I particularly did it with Dr. Who's, is I did not just stick with the courtroom testimony. I went back and started looking at what other documents were available and what had happened and started shaping an investigative story around the trial. And I will say this, I was so proud of my community because the story that really hit people, I remember the intro on it, and it was about the fact that the FBI had ruined this man's life. And I got so much reaction from people that I'll just say it might have been Trump voters, but it was something about when you take away the China part and made him a human being, which is what I tried to do, honestly, in the coverage. And that was effective. And there began to be support among regular people for this man, and they became invested in the outcome of this case. Why that was important to Dr. Who is because it puts pressure on the judge, it puts pressure on the Department of Justice. And so one of the things I wanted to point out were the incredible abuses of power by the FBI here in this case, the Department of Energy, and frankly, NASA. If there is a guilty party at all in this case, it's a fellow from NASA. And forgive me, it's Dr. Bar Cohen. I can't quite remember the entirety of his name, but I will say this. What struck me as I'm listening to what he did, he tried to get Dr. Who to be a little shady. Dr. Who would not, because he wanted his technology. NASA wanted what Dr. Who had. And so this fellow was willing to be a little shady if necessary. He's never been charged. And he's the only person I've ever seen, and I've covered thousands of cases. I've never seen a defendant or a witness be allowed to testify with a lawyer sitting next to him. But this fellow had that. And why in the world the government would have allowed that? And again, I'm Phil is the expert on the law and why those things happen. But that struck me too, is if anybody ought to be in handcuffs, it's that guy. So that was one of the things that really struck me, is they focused on Dr. Who. They would not come off Dr. Who. And they were willing to follow his son. That one just killed me. I'm a mother. Harassing behavior. You know, he can't go to the airport. You know, he gets searched at the airport. And on a wire fraud case, that was what kept hitting me too, is ultimately all they had was a wire fraud case, and it wasn't even, should not have passed the probable cause standard. It should not have gotten even to the grand jury, past the grand jury level. The proof was that weak. But once Dr. Who said to this agent that they wanted Dr. Who to cooperate with them, to basically become a spy for them. Okay, you're not a spy, so can we make you a spy? And when he very correctly decided not to do that, that's when they went after him. And at that moment, that agent was determined to go after this guy and charge him with whatever he could get him on. And there really was no investigation. They did some surveillance, but all they really did was go into the University of Tennessee and go get access to records that they should not have had access to. And they built a case out of whole cloth. I mean, it's if anything, Dr. Who was set up by his own university. His own university lied to him. His own university pushed him to sign this application, knowing that was going to lead to his arrest. The University of Tennessee has always prided itself with its relationship with the Chinese community. And at the time that Dr. Who was hired, the University of Tennessee had, I can't remember the exact name of it, but it was basically a Chinese community there on campus. And the reason I knew it was because they put on these wonderful shows with the dragons and all these parades, and I would go to those and take my children to them. And it was always a joint thing between the University of Tennessee and the China group that was on campus. So the idea that the University of Tennessee was shocked or was unaware that they should have any kind of affiliation with China or anybody from China was ridiculous. It was ridiculous. But when the FBI showed up at UT and they decided to protect the university instead of protecting their professor, and that was another thing I found galling. And the final thing I want to point out is, in terms of Judge Varlin, he could have done what's called a directed verdict at the end of the government's proof. The proof was that weak. But my belief is, knowing Judge Varlin as I do, he wanted the process to work. And he allowed the process to take place. So he let it go to a jury. And then, and there was, yes, there were a group who said this man should be acquitted. I'm not ever going to vote. We're not going to negotiate. He should be acquitted. But there were also people on that jury that said it's the FBI. It's the government. And that guy wouldn't be sitting there, just like Phil said, he wouldn't be sitting there if he didn't do something wrong. And that's two distinct camps within that jury. And thank God for it. But for those few holdouts, this man would be sitting, I hope not in prison, but he might have been. So when the jury decided that they were going to lay it down, that they were unable to reach a verdict, I thought that perhaps, especially with my coverage, I thought the department would end up saying that they were not going to retry this man. That's really what I thought. And that's what they should have done. But amazingly, I mean, truly amazingly, they did. Nothing had changed about their proof. And in fact, Phil had so vetted it as on the defense side, he had completely slashed every little bit they had. So I wondered about that. Why were they digging their heels in on his case? And I still don't know that answer. But what I did know was that when Judge Varlin would be forced to step up, and that was the moment of his decision where he had to decide. And he could have let the DOJ re-up, but he didn't. And I believe that he wanted to rule that way the first time he probably saw Phil's motion and saw the evidence, but he allowed the process to go forward. And thank goodness that it worked. And the final thing that I would point out in terms of why this man is now sitting here today in a much better position than he was in 2018 is Phil LaMonaco. I know Phil, and I know how hard he works for people. And I also know that he's not somebody that has $1 million law firm sitting around. He is a solo practitioner. And if you're a lawyer, you know the burden of that. You don't have a staff. You don't have people with your back. You don't have a team. And he's always been a terrific lawyer, but he brought his heart and his faith to this case. And it showed. And those 3 jurors, I believe it was Phil and Monica that planted that seed in them. Don't do wrong to this man. Because that, and I'm getting teary about it because, you know, I have so often seen lawyers who a client is a client and it's money. And it might be a little prestige if it's a high profile case. But they're all about themselves and winning. It's not who Phil LaMonaco is, but he darn sure needed to win this case. And the pressure on him was extraordinary.
That's enough, Jamie. You're embarrassing me.
I know, but it's true. And so he was nervous every day. And every day I said a little prayer for him, but because he held this man's life in his hands. And thank God for him. So, and one final thing I'll say is when Dr. Hu testified, I saw the heart of this man. And that's when I fell in love with him. And I'm looking at this jury going, how in the world are you going to convict this man? How? So again, thank God that the system ultimately worked. But the damage done to Dr. Hu, that can't be undone. Every time you Google the man's name, all of this is going to come up. And that's the damage that cannot be undone. And the Department of Justice has too much power. And when you get an administration like we had, we see the fruits of that. And whether it's a Dr. Hu or it's Jimmy on the sidewalk being falsely accused, there has to be a check on the Department of Justice. And unfortunately, we don't have as many Judge Varlins as we need to have that check.
Thank you so much, Jamie. And yes, you see the importance of public trials and of an independent judiciary. But of course, you know, that happens so late in the process after you, as you point out, you've already can have years of investigation and prosecution, and how important it is that early on there be checks, there be, you know, scrutiny of these cases. And in particular, because again, the more we learn about bias, including anchor bias, that once it gets set that this is the person, this is the, you know, the culprit, it is really hard to shake people's brains from that. And they will tend to discount any information that doesn't go with that narrative that is set, and they will tend to amplify any information they get that verifies what they already think is, who done it. So Mara, I saw a lot of nodding while Jamie was speaking. So I'd love for you to jump in again, because you also covered this and other cases, and there's some questions about how the China initiative, as well as Professor Hu's case, has been reported, and just any thoughts you would like to add at this point. Oh, you're muted.
Sorry. Yeah. Well, yeah, Jamie's coverage was truly extraordinary, and part of the reason it resonated with me was because I had read in researching my book, I spent years reading about every case and sitting in courtrooms myself, and 95% of the time the coverage is as she described, where it's based off a press release. Either people can't reach the defendant, or the defendant can't speak, and they're not given a chance to tell their story. There were a number of cases where the media coverage would kind of compare people to animals, or use and often the DOJ the DOJ press conferences themselves would use this very overwrought language of these people are foxes in a hen house, or they are locusts in a swarm, and so this was the kind of default language that was often being used. I think it's been toned down a little bit, but only because there is so much scrutiny on these cases now. The other thing that resonated was the degree of surveillance that Dr. Hu was subjected to. In the case that I wrote about was a different kind of case where the defendant was involved in attempting to take trade secrets, in this case genetically modified corn seed from Monsanto, but his role within the company was fairly minor, and yet the FBI spent months or years surveilling him by air often. So you flying unmarked planes overhead as he was going about his business in Iowa. So you can imagine him and his colleagues like driving across Midwestern farmland, and then there would be an unmarked FBI plane, with a kind of front name of some fake business flying overhead to keep tabs on them. And so these are the tools that are being pulled out in these cases. There's been a bit said about how the university seems to have thrown Dr. Hu under the bus in this case, and that is unfortunately something that's happened in many cases, and that may not be Dr. Hu's perspective. I know he's got a lot to deal with still in terms of his relationship with the university, and that there have been many people on the faculty who've been supportive. But what's happened at many institutions, to kind of the big picture is that the Chinese government has staked out plans to steal trade secrets, to improve its technology by any means possible. And if you read Chinese policy documents, those are very much there. At the same time, many US universities have built collaborations with universities in China over decades, many of them for good. Sometimes they get into areas that are more sensitive, where probably they should be scrutinized. But the fact of the matter is that they've encouraged their ethnic Chinese faculty to go and build those partnerships. So the projects originate with the universities and originate with the US institutions, and they're putting forth often the people who have family or cultural ties to China to go be the front people for those projects, to go build a connection to the Chinese university. And so in the case of MD Anderson Cancer Center, which I mentioned earlier, MD Anderson had huge business interests in China, and some of the same faculty members who were investigated had in fact been very involved in trying to build those ties in China. And, they were then thrown under the bus by the university when the FBI came knocking. And then it was almost as if the institution had not just spent many years trying to turn a profit in China. And so I left, it just leaves a really bad taste in your mouth to kind of watch again and again how universities have, and US institutions, often even corporations, have gone into China trying to make a profit, trying to build connections, in some cases also doing just legitimate academic collaborative work. And then the people who are put forth to be the face of those projects are the only ones who are punished for them. And so, I mean, this is like, the problem with many of these cases is that the scrutiny is falling on the individuals, and it's almost always falling on the individuals who have Chinese ethnicity. And when there are much larger geopolitical tensions at play, and there are, business interests, and there are long-standing institutional ties that go beyond those individuals.
Thanks. And I think this context is so key because, I'm a China studies person. This is the first time I've ever worked so much with people in the hard sciences, and it's been fascinating to hear about polymers and computer science and everything. But the reason it is because we're seeing this tension between the US and China reverberate domestically in a way that I have never seen in my career. And this challenge, which is not going away anytime soon, of recognizing that the PRC government, the party state, has aspirations that in some ways do incentivize behavior that can be illegal in the United States, but to respond to the legitimate threat in a way that is surgical and is not this sort of carpet bombing and having these tremendously devastating impacts. So I do want to give Dr. Hu another chance to, you've heard all these people speak about, the case and your experience, any reflections you have, but also in the chat, someone raised, if you have any thoughts or advice for how to protect people themselves, faculties, and just, if there's any lessons learned or that you might want to share with people, because your words are obviously hitting a lot of people as experiences that, if not as dramatic and devastating as yours, they still resonate.
Thanks, Maggie. Yeah, that's the very nice question, and it reminded me wanted to share with our colleagues that so many people register this webinar. So, my feeling is, in fact, in the beginning, I also have the similar attitude. If some people some cases not relative to me, it's not out of my business. I mean, I don't need, because usually for the professor and the scientist, they are so focused on their field. It looks, I know like Dr. Xiaoxin, she was arrested. Even I was arrested 1 month before. It's Dr. Lieber, Charles Lieber was arrested. That month I even called Ivy and told her, I was shocked. One of the Harvard professor was arrested. I think that I should stop. Those are the Harvard professor. Right now he go to the trial. He's so famous. He's the member of the 5 of the academic organization, the leading organization. He probably is one of the person near to the Nobel Prize, to got the Nobel Prize. So I really got shocked. So I saw that probably stopped. Then, after a couple of weeks, it turned to me. I mean, yeah. When the FBI agent come to my office in the beginning of in April 2018, that time what he asked, I fully tell them. Of course, I tell them truth. But in fact, I know if I tell something wrong or by, careless mistake, I will be charged by false statement. That would be very serious. But unfortunately, I don't have this experience. I would advise all the other colleagues, if FBI come to talk with you, be very careful. You shouldn't talk with them. You should keep silent. I don't know this, in fact. You should conduct your legal conductor, before you can move forward. Because those FBI, they will not think that, they enjoy your story, they're interested in your research, they talk further without any purpose. When they come to talk to you, they already build a lot of documents from you, all the relative things. Be very serious. I think it's like in US, the legal system is quite independent. That's the one thing I trust. This is the US, the value. This is country. Be careful and get the lawyer the advice. And the other things. So be brief. When something happened, even is not relative to you, you should think next one maybe it's you. Okay. I believe that for most of professors, they have their international collaborations. Right now, the China, US have the very tensioned relationship, but it could change. It could be other countries, for example, the Germany or Japan or Canada even. So who knows? Because we work on the science and engineer side. We are not the political. I'm self, know the very little political. And I also don't have the interest in the political things. So from my experience, I really get the big lesson is we should, the political issue is not out of our life. It's any angle connected with our daily life. So that's something I felt at this moment as the US professor. Is one of the dangerous jobs. You have to be very careful. That's my feeling. That's also I want to share with others. Thanks.
Thanks. And I know that you're still dealing with immigration consequences and employment consequences. And so, we hope to, in 2022, to hear positive updates on all that, the residual, really serious aspects of all that you've gone through. It did not end with Judge Varlin issuing his opinion. I want to make sure, so we're going to move on and have two people I want to give a chance to speak, Mary McAlpin and Wendy Chandler. But first, I really, we've got a lot of people on this call who have been supporters. They've been of great assistance over the time of Professor Hu's case. So I just want to give a shout out to first Louis Gross, who's the president of the University of Tennessee Faculty Senate, Zhen Lin of the Knoxville Chinese Community, Christine Lai, president of the Greater Nashville Chinese Association, as well as Jin Liang Chai, who is the founder of the Tennessean Chinese Americans Alliance and chair of the United Chinese Americans Board of Directors. And I think, seen so many organizations, including AASF and these others that have become so important in providing support and as well as raising awareness of these issues. So next, I'd like to turn to see if Mary McAlpin, who's joined us, would like to say something. And she is the president of the University of Tennessee chapter of the American Association of University Professors.
Thank you, Maggie. I just want to thank all of you for this amazing panel. I've learned a great deal about something I thought I already knew a lot about. But I do want to speak first as president of the local chapter of the national organization, which is the American Association of University Professors. And the national organization really works to protect academic free speech, which includes scientific research, and also to protect tenure as a value, because when Dr. Hu was terminated from the university, he was a tenured professor. And the mechanics of it are maybe interesting just to bring forward right now, which are when, according to our faculty handbook, if you are indicted, you can be reassigned, suspended with pay, or suspended without pay. If you're suspended without pay and you are not a US citizen, you lose your visa pretty much immediately. And that is what permitted the university to terminate him without cause. He was not terminated for cause. He was terminated by this mechanical loss of the visa. And that was quite a while ago. It's been quite a while that he hasn't been paid. And I just can't imagine how that, and this is something I hope to work on at UT to change that, because an American citizen would not have been terminated. They might have been suspended without pay until the case was resolved, but not as a non-citizen, Dr. Hu was. And secondly, I just want to speak as an individual, as Dr. Hu's ex-colleague, and to say that there is a lot of support among your colleagues, your ex-colleague, you as an ex-colleague for you at the University of Tennessee. And I hate saying ex-colleague because I do hope to see you reinstated very soon. And everyone's been following this case very closely. And we cannot imagine what you and your family have gone through, especially your son, who was a student at UT. And we're very much looking forward to your reinstatement. And if there's anything we can do for you, please let us know. And I just sincerely do want you to know that there is much, much support for you. And we would all love to see you back on campus very soon.
Thanks so much. And you know, and then one more perspective, which I am so glad to be able to share that tonight, is Wendy Chandler, who's here, who was a member of the jury, and just, I mean, I am sure subject to its pressure, even if not meant by other members of the jury. And I'd love to hear your thoughts of your experience with this case.
Hello, thank you for being, I really am happy to be here. I find the most thing that I felt was anger after it, because it was so close. Dr. Hu was so close to being found guilty. It was just two of us. And it wasn't fair. There would have been three if one of the alternate jurors was kept on. But in the jury room, I was one of the rationals that Judge Varlin talked about. He said no rational jury. So there was just two of us, and it was so close. So I just want to know what I can do to stop this from happening to anyone else, and also help the Hu family.
Yeah, so with respect to helping the Hu family, I know that there has been funding efforts for legal costs, which are ongoing, and I'll let someone maybe from AASF put into the chat information there, because again, these are really expensive cases, and just monetary costs, as well as the physical again, and the emotional. And more generally, I've been really heartened to see so many people who are from communities that are not directly affected getting more involved, because you know, this should not be on the shoulders of the Asian American Pacific Islander, the AAPI, and foreign nationals who are in the US working and studying legally. It's not just about the Asian Americans, it's about foreign nationals who are in the US. It should not be on their shoulders alone. And so I think, you know, just raising awareness, you know, when, you know, making sure that, you know, not only if you hear people saying things that are biased and racist, to stand up and push back. But also, I think that we need to, you know, it's so hard with the pandemic, of course, to have people-to-people interactions. But with the holidays, we had Thanksgiving and going into Christmas. I know that when I was 10 years old, we had a woman from Shanghai live with my family. She was teaching in Madison, Wisconsin. And I think a lot of this too is we need to decrease some of the othering that's going on. And you do that by spending time with people who are different, which is seems small, but it can be big. Yeah, and to Wendy, anything else? And I'll let anyone else jump in with an answer to that question, but anything else?
I think what Mara Hvistendahl said about, you know, certain parts of America, you know, the likelihood of a jury, and also what Phil Lomonoko said about having the government stand in front of a jury as being proof itself, it very much was in that situation in the jury room. And that's scary. And that's awful. And it so easily could have gone a different way. And that's what made me so like angry and wanting to help.
Yeah, and I've seen a lot, the chat's been very active, and we want to trying to work in some of the questions and into what we're talking about. And one of them is, well, what are the consequences for the government? And it really requires egregious actions on the part of government agents, whether they be in the FBI
Yes.
or prosecutors, for there to be any legal action against them. And so I think, here more realistically, it's very limited what can be done to go back in time for the people who built the case against Professor Hu and others, and that it's much more the possibility of going forward in a different way. I will say that there's a large coalition of groups that's pushing very hard on the government to reevaluate not just the China initiative, but the broader framing and the activities. I'm an optimist by nature, but I am hopeful that we will get some movement. But this is not a short-term. This is not short-term work. This is not going away. This requires, really keeping an eye on the government and making sure that this isn't we got rid of the name China initiative, so we're done here, because that's far too simple. And I don't know if Jamie or Mara wants to jump in. I know that Professor Hu is limited in what he can say about with the jury, but if either, Jamie, I see you've unmuted.
I wanted to jump in. I noticed in the chat there was a question about a case involving University of Tennessee professor Reese Roth. Now, Reese was not of Chinese descent, but the case against him was because he had used researchers in a project, and it was the same allegation that he had tried to hide. There was nothing hidden about what Dr. Roth was doing. It was very apparent. So I guess one thing I wanted to point out is when we look at, it's great. Oh, Dr. Who's getting a good outcome, but this has been going on, and it's continuing to go on. And cases that I have seen made in connection to that's really related to, and it's not just China, but ethnicity and these issues that should not be in consideration at all. So that's one thing that Dr. Who's case was not the first that I had seen in my own jurisdiction, where it seemed that the targeting was more about China than the individual. And it was making a headline, so to speak, over prosecuting something related to China. And as just an American citizen and voter, I'm part of the problem, because I let the government do that. I don't push back as a citizen. And we don't. We go on about our lives, and maybe we read the headlines. But it really is going to take a fundamental change in America in terms of our hearts and looking at people, just as Martin Luther King said so long ago. And that's really what's at root of this, because the government's just doing what we let them do. Think about it. If we don't stand up for Dr. Who, then they're going to have free reign to continue to do what they do. So it really, if there is a burden, it should fall on each one of us. What can I do today to make this country better and more inclusive and more loving? And if we all do that, then we wouldn't even have this panel, truthfully. So
I want to give Mara a chance to jump in, and also we've unpinned Wendy so that Anming, if you want to now say something, to please do so too.
Yeah, I would just add, in considering what to do about the China initiative, and honestly, this was a concern before it was called the China initiative. There needs to be some assessment of, what is the end result of all of these cases. And the unfortunate truth is that in many situations, you have on the extreme end cases like Professor Hu's and Xiaoxing Xi's, where lives have been close to ruined for charges that should not have been brought. But you also have other examples where people feel like they're under scrutiny, or they are afraid to go for a certain grant, or go for DoD money, go for go for sensitive work, and end up getting recruited back to China because they just don't want to deal with all of this. And that is, of course, a loss for the United States government, and they are, losing out the very thing that they claim to be wanting to protect, which is U.S. innovation and ingenuity. The strength of the university sector, the strength of our research sector. That is the very thing that's being hurt. I think there are real questions and issues around what sorts of collaborations should be allowed. Should there be collaborations on sensitive military technology? Should there be collaborations on technologies that have human rights implications? Okay, that's fine. But at the end of the day, are all of these cases helping the cause that we claim that they're helping, right? Are we is innovation in America ultimately being protected, or is there going to be a brain drain of people back to China or to other countries? And if you look back in history, there are, this is not the first era in which there have been really unfortunate consequences of these sorts of investigations. So it happened after Wen Ho Lee. There was an exodus of people from U.S. national laboratories. There were so many people who left that there was a kind of Los Alamos clique back in China of people who had left, not because they had done anything wrong or they were under investigation, but they just felt like the climate was one in which they no longer wanted to be working. This arguably happened in the case of Chen Shui-sun in the 1950s as well, where there was a renowned professor who's under scrutiny who ends up leaving, going back to China, and then helping build China's nuclear weapons program. I mean, this is something that hurts America, full stop. And so, I've talked to many people from across the spectrum in the process of doing reporting. And I know that there are people within the Justice Department and within the FBI who do feel like the costs of some of these investigations are just not worth it. And so, it will be, I'll be waiting to see what happens with this initiative. And I know certainly that Professor Hu's case has had an effect as well.
So we only have a few minutes left, and I do want to give Professor Hu, one last chance, because again, we're just, the reason we haven't heard from you is as a defendant, you shouldn't be speaking to the press, and so for years you couldn't, and the fact that you even took the stand is really quite something, because it is unusual in a criminal trial for the defendant to take the stand. Because it opens you up to cross-examination by the government, and there's a lot of even incentives not to speak, and that you were so clear in your convictions, and that you stood up and said, I want to exercise that right to be in front of the jury, the fact finders, the people deciding my fate, and say my story. That alone, I think, is really important, and something that might not be understood by people who don't spend time looking at the criminal justice system on a regular basis.
Yeah. During the waiting for the pending trial, I have a lot of discussion with my legal lawyer, Phil. So Phil know what's the real. I know everything, but Phil see you have to keep silent because we are waiting for the trial. So we do file the Phil documents and motion to the court, but we think something, because as the U.S. the special legal system, so we have to keep our defense and evidence until the trial. So I watch the television and the media about my case. A lot of people have a lot of misunderstanding. I prefer to keep silent. That is really challenging to me. So when the trial comes, and even through the government evidence and their witness, their testimony. So Phil already see, it's very clear through the fields of the cross-examination. We prepare something like 14 witnesses. So finally, we only use the 2. So one is my mentor, so Dr. Babu, and myself. So Phil asked me to stand in the witness stand and defend myself. My wife, Ivy, a little bit worried about myself. I get the anxious and also the painful in my heart is really strong. And I know everything. I don't think I did anything wrong. That's the reason I wanted to, finally I decided to stand out. But that's really challenging to me because, to stand in the US, the court, probably the 1 minute, if I say something wrong or something happened, the next the journey, I mean the destination is to jail. Also probably for me is maybe the few years, 10 years or something, the penalty. That's really ruin my life. But I have no choice. That time the pressure is really, really higher. And I know there is a few cases before and after me. That time to waiting for the trial. But I felt whoever, there have to be must one be first, stand out to go to trial. So that time, so when Phil discussed with me, we think, I think I'm ready. Phil is also ready. We are fully ready. So Phil used me and he's the student. In fact, he's a UTK student, law school student, second year. So UTK student, second year student defense for UTK professors, previous the UTK professors. We 3 people sit in the courtroom, and on another side, they have over 10 the big team. So they prepare, a lot of documents. Everyone keep bringing the cases, and Phil only bring a piece of paper. Phil is only everything because we discussed several things. Everything is in his brain, and Phil just waiting. You guys want what do you want to say, and I only use your. It's enough. So I think it's amazing. We played several times, almost every day before we go to the court. Through this journey, of course, I'm still in the journey because of even I'm acquittal, but like a reinstatement, the immigration issue still not addressed. But I learned a lot of the lessons, especially the values, like the scientific research values, life values, and I put too many energy in the work. I didn't pay attention out of my own research. I don't know what really happened in US and between US and China. I still sometimes if I have a chance, I travel to China before the pandemic. Before my kids, before they arrested me. I think that what I did, everything is transparent. Nothing is secret because I do the fundamental research. I'm a foreigner. I don't qualify to any sensitive issue, sensitive material, or national security issue. I don't think I have that issue. And in my case, they special have the CIPA, that's called the Classified Protection Action. That's government sees some material in my case is belong to the secret. So the lawyer thinks, so if you have, that's you generate. We are clear, we don't have anything. And the government even want to use that to postpone the trial. But finally, Phil and me, we decided to waive that right. So we see whatever you have, okay, you keep secret, you delete that. We don't need that. So I think everything we know is good enough to prove my innocence. So the field did the magic work for me and defense that. So I'm the last witness to sit in the trial on a Friday afternoon. That time I get before the lunch, I sit the stand. In the first 10 minutes I speak really loud. I still can remember because so the prosecutor see, okay, this guy waiting at his house over 1.5 years, think about how he can prove his innocence. Of course, what I should do? I have no job, no income. I'm treated as a prisoner at home. So I'm waiting for the trial. Of course, I have priority is I just present the fact. So in the courtroom. So of course I should think about I need to tell what's the truth. I don't care about anything what they said. So even we not the defense too many when the government present that this is a fact. Yes, but what does this fact mean? So another thing I wanted to see. So when my case happened, nobody. So almost I should say in the courtroom, everything okay. If there is a fault, it's you. Is it? Anming Hu, you. You have the Chinese background. Okay. Everything is wrong. You did something wrong. If we know you do those before, we will not. We will protect it. That's not true. So this is already in the testimony and is in the court the record. Everyone can access that. But even like that, I think the other things I don't want to talk too much. So painful and the damage is really not the stop. It still continue to me, to my family, and especially for our kids. My daughter, she is only when my kids happened, she is only 5 years old. Now she is 6 years old. Already nearly 2 years not see her. So almost in the beginning half year, every day he asked Ivy, so when I can see my dad? So when my dad can see me? So because every in the school, usually is dad to pick up from the school or send to her to some after school program, but I cannot. In the beginning, we can see it's a pandemic. My wife say, "Oh, it's because of pandemic." Okay, so U.S. and Canada close the border. We cannot visit your father, but later on, it's possible. It's in some period, but right now probably it's they close again. But that's really painful. I keep to those relationship. I have to try to at night to tell the story to my daughter. And in the beginning, last year, each time even I cannot control my mode. Each time I nearly want to cry. So that's really painful. But I think I have to be brave because many people, many other scientists is similar as me. I'm lucky. I'm be blessed by God and by so many people support me. But anyway, I already passed the most dangerous period. But that's a lot of lessons. That's something I still, in my heart, I cannot speak out. So I hope this country will be better. So that mainly is not due to me, is rather than due to all of you. Thanks.
Thank you so much for your strength of spirit, and I know that Jamie is the mother of 2 boys because it's in her bio, and I have 2 boys. They're much younger, but as a parent, I think really appreciate you also just humanizing the costs of what this means and missing the time with your child, and that is something which I think oftentimes doesn't get highlighted enough, the costs of not being able to see family and the toll that this also puts on them. So, again, thank you so much, Professor Hu and Tamara and Jamie and everyone else and everyone who stuck around. We have a huge group. I'm going to hand it back to Stephen Page just for a minute, but it's 1:30 in the morning here and 1:37, and it's been worth every minute of the lost sleep for being able to moderate this just tremendous group.
Thank you, Maggie, and thank you all the panelists. I think today's the first time that Anming share his personal experience in public. So speaking for AASF, we thank you for giving this opportunity. There's one person, of course, who really needs the recognition is Ivy, Anming's wife. She had been traveling back and forth between Canada and Knoxville. And yesterday evening when I chat with her, She commented about the meeting today. She said, today is a reunion of friends and also the time for reflection. So thank you, Ivy, and thank you, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening.